So here's chapter 4. I said 45 chapters. We're going to get through 5 today. I might need to stretch these out a little bit more. Or maybe we just do L.M. Montgomery for this season. Just get his other books as well. All right. Chapter 4. Got your rubbers on? Called Cousin Stickles as Valency left the house. Christine Stickles had never once forgotten to ask that question when Valency went out on a damp day. Yes. Have you got your flannel petticoat on? Asked Mrs. Frederick. No. Doss, I really do not understand you. Do you want to catch your death of cold again? Her voice implied that Valency had died of a cold several times already. Go upstairs this minute and put it on. Mother, I don't need a flannel petticoat. My sateen one is warm enough. Doss, you remember you had bronchitis 2 years ago. Go and do as you're told. Valency went, though no one would ever know just how near she came to hurling the rubber plant into the street before she went. She hated that gray flannel petticoat more than any other garment she owned. Olive never had to wear flannel petticoats. Olive wore ruffled silk and sheer lawn and filmy laced flounces. But Olive's father had married money, and Olive never had bronchitis. So there you were. Are you sure you didn't leave the soap in the water? Demanded Mrs. Frederick. But Valency was gone. She turned at the corner and looked back down at the ugly, prim, respectable street where she lived. The Sterling house was the ugliest on it. More like a red brick box than anything else. Too high for its breadth, and made still higher by a bulbous glass cupola on top. About it was the desolate, barren piece of an old house whose life is lived. There is a very pretty little house, with leaded casements and dubbed gables just around the corner. A new house, one of those houses you love the minute you see them. Clayton Markley had built it for his bride. He was to be married to Jenny Lloyd in June. The little house, it was said, was furnished from attic to cellar, in complete readiness for its mistress. I don't envy Jenny the man, thought Valency sincerely. Clayton Markley was not one of her many ideals. But I do envy her the house. It's such a nice young house. Oh, if I could ever have a house of my own. Ever so poor, so tiny. But my own, but then, she added bitterly, there is no use in yowling for the moon when you can't even get a tallow candle. In dreamland, nothing would do Valency but a castle of pale sapphire. In real life, she would have been fully satisfied with a little house of her own. She envied Jenny Lloyd more fiercely than ever today. Jenny was not so much better looking than she was, and not so very much younger, yet she was to have this delightful house, and the nicest little Wedgwood teacups. Valency had seen them. An open fireplace, and monographed linen, hem-stitched tablecloth, and, china closets. Why did everything come to some girls and nothing to others? It wasn't fair. Valency was once more seething with rebellion as she walked along, a prim, dowdy little figure in her shabby raincoat and 3-year-old hat, splashed occasionally by the mud of a passing motor with its insulting shrieks. Motors were still rather a novelty in Deerwood, though they were common in Port Lawrence, and most of the summer residents up at Muskogee had them. In Deerwood, only some of the smart set had them, for even Deerwood was divided into sets. There was the smart set, the intellectual set, the old family set, of which the Sterlings were members, the common run, and a few pariahs. Not one of the Sterling clan had as yet condescended to a motor, though Olive was teasing her father to have one. Valency had never even been in a motor car, but she did not hanker after this. In truth, she felt rather afraid of motor cars, especially at night. They seemed to be too much like big purring beasts that might turn and crush you, or make some savage, terrible leap somewhere. On the steep mountain trails around her blue castle, only this is the first word I fully don't know how to pronounce. Only gaily caparisoned steeds might proudly pace. In real life, Valency would have been quite contented to drive in a buggy behind a nice horse. She got a buggy drive only when some uncle or cousin remembered to fling her a chance, like a bone to a dog. That's the end of chapter 4. That chapter was mostly just arguing, just kind of showing us what's going on with her. Let's get on to chapter 5. Of course, she must buy the tea in Uncle Benjamin's grocery store. To buy it anywhere else was unthinkable, yet Valency hated to go to Uncle Benjamin's store on her 29th birthday. There was no hope that he would not remember it. "Why?" demanded Uncle Benjamin, leeringly as he tied up her tea. "Are young ladies like bad grammarians?" Valency, with Uncle Benjamin's will in the background of her mind, said meekly, "I don't know. Why?" "Because," chuckled Uncle Benjamin, "they can't decline matrimony." The two clerks, Joe Hammond and Claude Bertram, chuckled also, and Valency disliked them a little more than ever. On the first day Claude Bertram had seen her in the store, she had heard him whisper to Joe, "Who's that?" And Joe had said, "Valency Sterling, one of the Deerwood old maids." "Curable or incurable?" Claude had asked with a snicker, evidently thinking the question very clever. Valency smarted anew with the sting of that recollection. 29, Uncle Benjamin was saying. "Dear me, Doss, you're dangerously near the second corner, and not even thinking of getting married yet. 29, it seems impossible." Then Uncle Benjamin said an original thing. Uncle Benjamin said, "How time does fly." "I think it crawls," said Valency passionately. Passion was so alien to Uncle Benjamin's conception of Valency that he didn't know what to make of her. To cover his confusion, he asked another conundrum as he tied up her beans. Cousin Stickle had remembered at the last moment that they must have beans. Beans were cheap and filling. "What two ages are apt to prove illusory?" asked Uncle Benjamin, and not waiting for Valency to give it up, he added, "Mirage and marriage." "Mirage is pronounced mirage," said Valency shortly, picking up her tea and her beans. For the moment, she did not care whether Uncle Benjamin cut her out of her will or not. She walked out of the store while Uncle Benjamin stared after her with his mouth open. Then he shook his head. "Poor Doss is taking it hard," he said. Valency was sorry by the time she reached the next crossing. Why had she lost her patience like that? Uncle Benjamin would be annoyed and would likely tell her mother that Doss had been impertinent. "To me!" And her mother would lecture her for a week. "I've held my tongue for 20 years, thought Valency. Why couldn't I have held it once more? Yes, it was just 20, Valency reflected, since she had been first twitted with her loveless condition. She remembered the bitter moment perfectly. She was just 9 years old, and she was standing alone on the school playground while the other little girls of her class were playing a game in which you must be chosen by a boy as his partner before you could play. Nobody had chosen Valency. Little pale, black-haired Valency, with her prim, long-sleeved apron and odd, slanted eyes. "Oh," said a pretty little girl to her, "I'm so sorry for you. You haven't got a beau." Valency had said defiantly, as she continued to say for 20 years, "I don't want a beau." But this afternoon, Valency once and for all stopped saying that. "I'm going to be honest with myself anyhow," she thought savagely. "Uncle Benjamin's riddles hurt me because they're true. I do want to be married. I want a house of my own. I want a husband of my own. I want sweet, little fat babies of my own." Valency stopped suddenly, aghast at her own recklessness. She felt sure that Reverend Dr. Stalling, who passed her at this moment, read her thoughts and disapproved of them thoroughly. Valency was afraid of Dr. Stalling, had been afraid of him ever since the Sunday 23 years before when he had first come to St. Albans. Valency had been too late for Sunday school that day, and she had gone into the church timidly and sat in their pew. No one else was in the church, no one except the new rector, Dr. Stalling. Dr. Stalling stood in front of the choir door, beckoned to her, and said sternly, "Little boy, come up here." Valency had stared around her. There was no little boy. There was no one in all the huge church but herself. The strange man with the blue glasses couldn't mean her. She was not a boy. "Little boy," repeated Dr. Stalling, more sternly still, shaking his forefinger fiercely at her. "Come up here at once!" Valency arose as if hypnotized and walked up the aisle. She was too terrified to do anything else. What dreadful thing was going to happen to her? What had happened to her? Had she actually turned into a boy? She came to a stop in front of Dr. Stalling, and he shook his forefinger, such a long, knuckly forefinger, too, at her and said, "Little boy, take off your hat." Valency took off her hat. She had a scrawny little pigtail hanging down her back, but Dr. Stalling was short-sighted and did not perceive it. "Little boy, go back to your seat, and always take off your hat in church. Remember." Valency went back to her seat carrying her hat like an automaton. Presently, her mother came in. "Doss," said Mrs. Sterling, "what do you mean by taking off your hat? Put it on instantly." Valency put it on instantly. She was cold with fear lest Dr. Stalling should immediately summon her up again. She would have to go, of course. It never occurred to her that one could disobey the rector. And the church was full of people now. Oh, what would she do if that horrible stabbing forefinger was shaken at her again before all these people? Valency sat through the whole service in an agony of dread and was sick for a week afterwards. Nobody knew why. Mrs. Frederick again bemoaned herself of her delicate child. Dr. Stalling found out his mistake and laughed over it to Valency, who did not laugh. She never got over her dread of Dr. Stalling, and now to be caught by him on the street corner thinking such things. Valency got her John Foster book, Magic of Wings. "It's his latest, all about birds," said Mrs. Clarkson. She had almost decided she would go home instead of going to see Dr. Trent. Her courage had failed her. She was afraid of offending Uncle James, afraid of angering her mother, afraid of facing gruff, shaggy-browed old Dr. Trent, who would probably tell her, as he had told Cousin Gladys, that her trouble was entirely imaginary, and that she only had it because she liked to have it. No, she would not go. She would get a bottle of Redfern's purple pills instead. Redfern's purple pills were the standard medicine of the Sterling clan. Had they not cured second cousin Geraldine when 5 doctors had given her up? Valency always felt very skeptical concerning the virtues of the purple pills, but there might be something in them, and it was easier to take them than to face Dr. Trent alone. She would glance over the magazines in the reading room a few minutes, and then go home. Valency tried to read a story, but it made her furious. On every page was a picture of the heroine surrounded by adoring men. And here was she, Valency Sterling, who cannot get a solitary beau. Valency slammed the magazine shut. She opened Magic of Wings. Her eyes fell on the paragraph that changed her life. "Fear is the original sin," wrote John Foster. "Almost all the evil in the world has its origin in the fact that someone is afraid of something. It is a cold, slimy serpent coiling around you. It is horrible to live with fear, and it is, of all things, degrading." So Valency shut Magic of Wings and stood up. She would go and see Dr. Trent. And that was the end of chapter 5. Only an hour, geez. Okay, we can now guesstimate. How long this book is. I don't know if the chapters get longer as we get further in, but it would take me about 45 minutes to read through a chapter of Dracula. It took me 5 hours, so let's say 45 minutes for 4 chapters of The Blue Castle. Let's say it's a 4-to-1 ratio. 45 chapters to 27. Roughly as long maybe a little shorter than Dracula. Maybe a little shorter. It's unclear.